everybody the rules of the road, and that way we can get started and not fall too far behind time. I think we all know how these types of longer workshops can go, and it's easy to get backed up. So we'll go ahead and get going. So hello, friends, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning for the virtual workshop and discussion, which is supporting OA monitoring, action planning, and implementation in the Mid-Atlantic. So my name is Jessie Turner, and I am the director of the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification, and I'll be one of your happy moderators or MCs today. I just want to begin with a couple rules of the road before we get started. So today's meeting is going to be recorded with the exception of our breakout sessions. We will be sure to check with all the presenters before sharing the recording into the future for whatever different purposes we think that would be useful to share. We are requesting that cameras be turned off with the exception of our presenters, of course, when we're doing sections that are presentations, but then we'll ask you to turn on your cameras when we go into the group discussion later on. It's a long Zoom workshop today, so we encourage you to stretch your legs. No one will be upset if you want to stand in the back of the room or walk back and forth to get coffee. So please do what is required to get through a good 3.5 hours on Zoom. The first two sections of presentations, after the first two sections of presentations, which will be a pretty blocked set of presentations, we'll take about a 10-minute health break, or at least take a minute to catch our breath as we are able to, before moving into one more set of presentations, which will be followed by a large group discussion, and then smaller breakout sessions before we conclude today. And so one extra note for everybody, today's group work includes the option of using something called Jamboard to communicate your written ideas, general reactions to questions that we are posing to you, and also items for future brainstorming for MACAN and various committees and partners moving forward. And it's a big group, so we want to use this tool as a way to document your thoughts and contributions to the discussion, even if we can't actually get to the physical call and response with everybody in the room today. So again, Jamboard engagement is not required, but it definitely is encouraged, and we appreciate you to think about that type of contribution as sort of an aid to the discussion today. So from here, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to MACAN co-coordinator, Avalon Burstow, for a more formal welcome, and then on to Dwight Gledhill, who is the acting director of NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program, for some framing thoughts and opening remarks to help us get in the right frame of mind for the next couple hours. And then one other note, myself and then Holly Berger with NOAA will be around. We're in the chat, so if you need us, let us know, and we'll do our best to moderate some of the chat call and response. So Avalon, great privilege to turn it over to you. Thank you for all of your hard work bringing this workshop and themes and people together. You've got a great team, and look forward to this discussion today. So over to you.
Thanks so much, Jessie, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the workshop planning team, I'd like to welcome you to today's half-day virtual workshop, Ocean Acidification Monitoring, Action Planning, and Implementation in the Mid-Atlantic. This workshop is sponsored by the Mid-Atlantic Coastal Acidification Network, or MACAN, which is a partnership between the Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean, MARCO, and MACAN, which is the Mid-Atlantic Coastal and Ocean Observing System. It's also sponsored by the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification, OA Alliance. You just heard from Jessie Turner from the OA Alliance there. As Jessie mentioned, my name is Avalon Bristow. I am program director at MARCO, where, among other things, I co-coordinate MACAN alongside Mary Ford, who's the director of engagement and external relations at Maracus. As a coastal acidification network, MACAN seeks to deepen our collective understanding about processes associated with estuarine, coastal, and ocean acidification in the region to help communities and industries better prepare and adapt. We serve as an information hub and exchange for scientists, governmental agencies, and industry members, focusing on waters and impacted species from south of Long Island to and including Virginia. Outreach conducted by organizations like MACAN and the OA Alliance has really helped shape an understanding about what can be done in terms of planning, policy setting, and monitoring in order to get ahead of acidification events in the region. many states in the Mid-Atlantic have begun developing OA action plans, which frame strategies for building knowledge about and preparing for ocean and coastal acidification. During today's workshop, we really want to explore what's needed to bring us from OA action planning to OA action implementation and how those efforts can be coordinated across the region. And on this slide, you can see sort of a reiteration of the objectives that have been shared with attendees prior to this date. So with this in mind, our agenda will start by building a foundation of knowledge about what different states are doing in terms of OA action planning. We'll hear their perspectives about what information is needed to move into implementation. We'll then move into presentations about OA monitoring and regional data sharing. We'll hear from our friends on the West Coast about how they are approaching a regional monitoring network. Then we'll have a facilitated discussion to explore the concepts from the presentations more deeply. The planning team has thoughtfully crafted an agenda that will allow for ample discussion and interaction among participants. In addition to the facilitated discussion, there will be 4 breakout rooms at the end of the workshop for small group discussion around topics like action planning and synthesis products, regional vulnerability assessments, co-locations of biological monitoring and research, and building a Mid-Atlantic regional monitoring inventory. The planning team will be providing links to Jamboards throughout the workshop, which can be used at your discretion to enter your thoughts and ideas, as Jessie mentioned in her introduction. The discussions from today's workshop will help inform MACAN's work planning for 2022 and beyond. We will produce a summary report over the following weeks that we distributed to everyone in attendance today. And additionally, all presentations will be recorded and shared on MACAN's website, which is www.midacan.org. The breakout sessions will not be recorded. However, takeaways from each session will be reflected in the summary report. I do want to thank all of the presenters and facilitators who have so graciously given us their time today. I also wanted to extend a special thank you to the workshop planning team, really, who's put in so many hours in pulling this together. I also wanted to thank the members of the MACAN steering committee who provided a lot of input into the themes that you'll see in today's agenda and who have joined us here today. So with that, I am very, very pleased to welcome Dwight Gledhill, Acting Director of the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program, who will provide opening remarks. So Dwight.
Fantastic. Thank you, Evelyn. And thanks everybody for inviting me. Special thanks to MACAN, that community. You know, events like this are a real fantastic illustration of how important these coastal acidifications networks are that we have around the nation. They're done in partnership between our program, NOAA OAP, regional IOS associations and others, and a lot of federal agencies and state partners on them. And it's really critical for us to get a better sense of what exactly the research needs are at the regional level. So thanks so much for inviting me to open up this event. I looked over your agenda. It looks really ambitious for the next few hours and fantastic. It's absolutely precedent as our program is leading the interagency effort to provide a full regional vulnerability reporting to Congress over the next couple of years. Efforts of this kind will absolutely aid us in ensuring that that reporting captures the regional interest on ocean acidification. So I want to start by reminding folks, or perhaps making them aware for the first time, that NOAA recently documented what it views as the major regional priorities regarding ocean acidification in its Ocean, Coastal, and Great Lakes Acidification Research Plan, which is available from our NOAA Ocean Acidification Program website. It includes a full chapter dedicated to the Mid-Atlantic region, which the efforts you'll be discussing today, I'm hoping, can coordinate and leverage some of what the agency is proposing on that. Some of the key overarching priorities that we have listed in the region are to improve daily to decadal forecasting informed through modified regional observing system. By modified, we mean to date, most of our observing system that we have around the nation has primarily focused at the surface because it was built originally from a carbon observing network, which was just primarily looking at gas fluxes. So we hope that at least over the next several years, we're going to be increasing the capabilities of the observing system to become to be able to resolve more effectively the vertical dynamics, with a particular emphasis at looking at the reactive surfaces. So looking at the sediment to water interface and the shore to coast interface, we think are going to be critical. Another aspect of that plan highlights looking at ocean acidification in the context of other multiple stressors. And that as we look at ecological and economic species which might be affected by acidification, we need to understand those responses in the context of a warming ocean, among other factors as well, like hypoxia. We also noted that it's critical that we carefully evaluate the cost benefits of any mitigation adaptation strategy, which we arrive at and suggest, and to promote integration of ocean acidification's understanding into regional planning and management, of which a workshop like this speaks specifically to. So in reviewing the agenda, I'm really excited to see the breakout discussions this afternoon, provided they're going to be really tackling issues germane to even high-level discussions ongoing at NOAA regarding how our science can better inform what Rick Spinrad likes to call the new blue economy, how we can ensure that the data we're acquiring is feeding into products and services formatted and delivered not only to drive cutting-edge research, but also to more readily inform decision support. So what we mean by decision support is critically dependent on who's making what decision. And so I'm super eager to hear from some of the state agencies that are going to be speaking in a moment. So I'll leave you with just a few thoughts of my own before we get going, some food for thought, if you will. Monitoring is a means to some desired outcome and not an end by itself. Most folks visiting their local hardware store are not so much interested in acquiring a drill, but rather obtaining a hole in their wall to which they expect to mount some bookshelf. So the drill is simply a means to achieve some outcome by itself, and not by itself, it's not all that useful. So similarly, deploying and observing asset must be understood only in the context of what the intended outcome from the resulting time series is. So as we talk about optimizing the observing system within these regions, I want us to have real careful consideration as to what we intend the specific data output to be informing. This is why the OAP has always sought a balanced transdisciplinary science portfolio, whereby monitoring represents a critical element of a broader science enterprise. So for example, perhaps 70% of the shellfish and finfish managed by the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council have not to date been investigated for ocean acidification impacts. So the best observing system in the world will not by itself speak to the specific risk OA poses to the mid-Atlantic unless we have a clear understanding of how these species might be sensitive to it. So we want to ensure that the observing system we're building is carefully calibrated to inform experimental designs and elicit, episodic events and that can help us maybe develop habitat suitability maps and whatnot. So also evidence is building that estuarine taxa are likely more resilient than species in offshore habitats to elevated CO2. So we want to make sure that we're not overbalancing one end of the observing portfolio versus the other. We want to make sure we have it, we're carefully considering both ends of the domain, because at this point, we don't really know which is the most hypersensitive region to be looking at. So what are the most actionable state-based decisions which can benefit from ocean acidification science input? And what are the best mechanisms by which those state actors are looking to receive that information? How can we best delineate the state versus federal roles and responsibilities? And how can we ensure that our efforts are complementary to the best of our abilities? So those are some of the thoughts I thought might be helpful to consider before we get going. And I think with that, we're set up for the first talk. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah, thank you so much, Dwight. Those were awesome framing remarks. Really appreciate them and appreciate you being here for today's workshop. So that's couldn't be a better segue. So I will be sparse in my own as far as getting to our first set of presenters. So as many of you know, the OA Alliance, has been calling for the terminology around these OA action plans by government members, in this case, US states, but really, they're really just frameworks for priorities and for some organizing principle around how the state is going to outline priorities and next steps, funding needs, funding support for some of these activities that of course are going to be at the state level and in partnership with non-state actors. And so the next set of presenters, we've asked them to come and give you a little bit of overview, not so much just on the process for an OA action plan and what they have come up with, but really to lean in a little bit more technically to some of the knowledge gaps that they have identified or prioritized as most important to fill in their own state-led action planning efforts. And are there any specific targeted research projects that would be most useful for this longer term, well, near term and longer term implementation? And I think Dwight did a great job outlining what some of those might be. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce the next three speakers and then we'll just go in order. So we'll have Megan Rakowski with the State of New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. We will have Dr. Henry Bukinievich, who is with the New York Ocean Acidification Task Force, and then followed by our last state speaker from the state of Maryland, Department of Environment, Rachel Lamb. So Megan, over to you, and I'll do the polite thing. If we go way over time, I'll do some little prompt verbally, but you've got 8 minutes on the clock, and thanks so much for being here.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. I hopefully will not go over time. All right, get everything set up. Okay, thank you. All right, hi, my name is Megan Rakowski. I'm with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection's Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning. Today, I just wanted to give you first a quick background on our state's evolving work in the realm of ocean acidification planning that has come out of our larger climate resilience planning efforts. And second, to try and highlight where we would like to go and some of these knowledge gaps that we see in the road moving forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so one major push for the climate-related work in New Jersey began with Executive Order 89. So this addressed climate resilience specifically and was signed by Governor Murphy on October 29th, 2019. So EO 89 created a lot of new things for the state of New Jersey. The position of Chief Resilience Officer, our Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning, and also an interagency council on climate resilience. And among these many things, it also directed the DEP specifically to create a scientific report on climate change, which was released on our website in June of 2020, a statewide climate change resilience strategy that also includes within it our first coastal resilience plan, the draft of which was released on Earth Day, and the final plan was just released earlier this month. I said all of these were first for the state of New Jersey. Next slide, please. Okay, so those of us working in the climate and ocean world with an interest in OA and its effects in New Jersey had a couple of lofty goals. The first of which was to make sure that OA science found its place in our first scientific report, which we were able to accomplish here. Our first scientific report on climate change contains an OA chapter as New Jersey specific as the research allowed us to be able to do. So our report will be updated or at least revisited in some form or another, at least every 2 years as mandated by EO 89. So right now our plan is hopefully to rework our report, mostly as it is, as we found not so much has changed in the research in the past 2 years. So we're hoping this go around to make it a little more accessible, web-friendly story map version on our website. So stay tuned for that coming up. Next slide, please. Okay. So some things that we learned from the science is that New Jersey is predicted to be at high risk of economic harm from OA conditions. So one of the reasons this is that southern New Jersey counties rank second in the US in economic dependence on our shellfish, which will suffer from increasing ocean acidity. Also, in addition to open ocean acidification, our coastal ecosystems will be affected by such local amplifiers as eutrophication or the over-enrichment nutrients and the excessive growth of algae, freshwater runoff, and upwelling. Next slide, please. So another of our goals is to prepare New Jersey's first OA action plan. And to this end, under the umbrella of the New Jersey Coastal Management Program, the Bureau of Climate Resilience Planning and the Bureau of Marine Water Monitoring formed New Jersey's OA team. So our team then went out and engaged New Jersey's Climate Change Resource Center at Rutgers University to gain insights into a couple of things, such as filling some of our knowledge gaps that we learned in the scientific report, some of our scientific understanding of OA impacts in New Jersey, learning from the experiences of other coastal states regarding their OA action planning process, and outlining what elements New Jersey can use in our own OA action plan, as well as a roadmap on how to get there. Next slide, please. Right, so to continue with our planning efforts, we're seeking all of the outside help that we can get. So our OA team has now expanded to include partners from across New Jersey's coastal management program. So in addition to the Bureaus of Climate Resilience Planning and Marine Water Monitoring, the team now includes our Bureau of Shell Fisheries, Division of Science and Research, Air Quality, Energy and Sustainability Program, and Water and Land Management Program. Next slide, please. We were also able to officially join the OA Alliance as the state of New Jersey during our Earth Day celebrations this year. So we're excited now to also coordinate our action planning efforts with the Alliance and their gracious community. Next slide, please. So what are we up to now? Our OA team and the team at Rutgers are again working together to start the process of building out a statewide OA monitoring network in New Jersey. Dr. Grace Saba at Rutgers is leading our efforts here, and we are co-hosting a virtual workshop on November 19th with industry members, academia, and other interested stakeholders throughout New Jersey. From this, we hope to be able to bring a workshop summary, draft recommendations, and further engage stakeholders in proposing a comprehensive statewide monitoring network. Next slide, please. Right, so we've been asked today to think on some of the knowledge gaps we've come across in our work and how they may be filled. I think a very important one, especially when starting out in a new area like OA is for the state of New Jersey, is just knowing what it is you don't know. What kinds of things are out there or aren't out there? What may be helpful for us? What can you do with the data? This is why we started out our work with Rutgers by doing interviews with many of the states that have already written or are further along in their OA action plan writing. We will definitely be circling back to those interviews in the coming months and year ahead to revisit all of that info, seeing what was helpful for other states, what will work for and what of that info can actually work in the state of New Jersey. So this brings me to a need found in our research for the science report to have more New Jersey specific studies, or even Mid-Atlantic and Northeast studies. As helpful as our West Coast friends have continued to be to us, species conditions and ocean conditions vary so much from coast to coast and even up and down our own coast. So we've identified some significant research gaps for local conditions. And again and again, we've seen the need for comprehensive a monitoring network. And that's why we decided to start there. Because even if we're not entirely sure what we can or what we're going to be able to do with the data we'll be getting from that monitoring network, we know we need it. So we figured that was a good place to start. So lastly, to my little elephant in the room down there. Oh, sorry, not yet. To have that little elephant in the room that we hate to talk about is also funding and approvals. So because we can plan the best, most amazing comprehensive OA monitoring network and even OA action plan for that matter. But the next step is always putting it into practice. And that requires all new levels of funding from somewhere. So now I'm going to have quickly a few slides that were donated or borrowed from Dr. Saba that she did for us, highlighting New Jersey's research gaps and observational needs. So forgive me if I fumble a little bit through these. All right, so highlighting some of our significant research gaps. As I mentioned earlier, I think we definitely have a need for, I think, Mid-Atlantic, but specifically New Jersey-based data. And that became very apparent to us when doing our scientific report. And I think that becomes very apparent in this example that Dr. Saba pointed out. Here, it's known that looking throughout, that majority of species tend to respond negatively to changing OA conditions. And here we have many commercially and recreationally important species in New Jersey waters. But in this list of these 35 managed species in our region, 69% or 24 of these species have not specifically been investigated for acidification impacts. So this is kind of a knowing what we don't know. It's we're assuming that as in other places of the world, they're changing and worsening OA conditions are not going to be good, but having that really good specific New Jersey data as far as going forward and making state decisions is something we definitely want to get from the monitoring network. And this is also a data gap where we could have future papers and research that would be very helpful to our state. So next slide, please.
Just giving you a 1-ish minute warning, Meg.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Next slide. Oh, you have it. I'm sorry. So yeah, so some also, I didn't change my slides. That's from some observation needs. Looking at where we're sampling, it may look like we're hitting a lot of areas, but when you zoom in, it's not as robust as we need it to be. So we could use some higher sampling frequency, measurements of multiple carbonate chemistry parameters, high resolution depth profiling, not concentrating so much at the surface, monitoring across salinity gradients, observing OA stressors with other stressors in the same area, and also co-located biological response monitoring. Next slide. And lastly, opportunities to fill monitoring gaps. We found that New Jersey would benefit, obviously, from a comprehensive statewide monitoring network that can cohesively act to address observation needs. And in order to do this, we're suggesting that we use repository of ongoing OA monitoring locations and cruises. We'll find it helpful to coordinate with partners and agencies to add carbonate chemistry parameters to existing monitoring stations. Basically, where can we possibly share resources and not invent the wheel wherever possible to help each other. Enhance nearshore monitoring using gliders and partner with industry groups to begin monitoring at economic sites of interest. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Feel free to contact me with any questions and any specific questions to technical questions on Dr. Saba's slides, I will definitely pass along.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Megan, for kicking us off. That was a great overview and context setting for all of this. So thank you. And I'm sure we'll continue to see some themes of some of the gaps and needs and priority locations potentially. So with that, thrilled to turn it over now to Henry Bukinjevich with New York State's OA Task Force. So Henry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. I see the first slide is up.
Over to you.
I'm here to talk about New York State's Ocean Acidification Task Force, which was set up by the governor to identify causes, factors contributing to ocean acidification. And this task force was required to assess the impacts, especially on commercial species, to come up with recommendations for monitoring, for strengthening protective standards, for response, New York's response to impacts, for monitoring ecological effects, and also increasing public awareness, all with the goal of integrating OA mitigation and adaptation strategies into New York's environmental plans. Can I have the next slide, please? It was set up in 2016. Of course, it was delayed after that time due to COVID, but it does have 14 members who have been active for the whole period. It's gone through 9 versions of an interim report. And right now we're in draft version 9, which is intended to be the final version. And it's hoped to go out for public review early next year. I should say that I'm relatively new to this whole process. We were handicapped by the untimely death of Larry Swanson last year, but we're pushing on now. Next slide, please. There are 2 limitations or elements of this task force report. One is that it's dealing with coastal ocean acidification. The reason is we feel that that's what New York State can effectively try to mitigate with at the state level. While we recognize that global ocean acidification requires our cooperation and commitment, also that's going to be something done, of course, on a larger regional or national collaboration. Have the next slide, please. The report also focuses heavily on synergistic effects of nitrogen, low dissolved oxygen, and water quality in general, so that the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan, which is underway, and projects like the extension of sewage treatment plants into offshore monitoring are important elements of this report. Have the next slide, please. The report itself has 5 sets of recommendations that they're working on. One is on mitigation to reduce the extent, magnitude, and impact of ocean acidification. There's a set of recommendations on suggestions for education to increase public awareness and generate political will. There's a section on information gaps and the engagement in monitoring, with recommendations and suggestions for ways that New York State can be engaged in that. There is a section on the engagement to form partnerships with businesses, industry, government jurisdictions, and other programs that are actively engaged in relevant operations. And there's recommendations on legislation and the development of these regulatory action plans. To go on, I would just like to focus on some of the elements of the third set of recommendations on the investigation of information gaps and engagement in monitoring. Within that group, there are 4 themes. We've got 2 elements, 5 sets, and 4 themes. Can I have the next slide, please? So some of the recommendations are geared at removing or neutralizing acidic sources. The little letters and numbers refer to specific sections in the report, but this is meant just to give you an overview of what's being considered. Under removing and neutralizing sources, we're just under discussion for techniques to alter freshwater flows impacting coastal acidification. Looking at the chemistry of mitigation measures in particular that might be employed for mitigation, and to quantify the effectiveness and scale of potential mitigation measures. Many of these need to be expanded and put on a firm footing before we can consider investments in these things. The second theme is a theme of ameliorating sources of both carbon dioxide and nutrients. This goes back to the emphasis on nitrogen remediation. And in there are 3 recommendations, one on quantifying linkages nutrient enrichment, hypoxic waters, and OA. And many of the mitigations are geared at targeting nutrient enrichment, nitrogen sources, rather than carbon reductions directly. Second, on determining residence times for embayments, we kept coming back to the need for better information on residence time and circulation as it affects water quality in general. And a third on understanding the ecological functions, especially of salt marshes and relation of aquatic and marine vegetation in mitigations of ocean acidification. I have the next slide, please. I keep pushing the button thinking it's going to do something. Our third theme is on ecological use, recycling, and storage of carbon and nitrogen. And in there, we're looking at recommendations to scale and research to scale from individual species to ecosystem impacts. Also on work on the genetic resilience of a species to ocean acidification and possible mitigation using this genetic resilience as developed naturally in these species. Third is to investigate restoration of rib mussel populations. This is a program that was undertaken, very successful program undertaken by the city of New York in Jamaica Bay, and consideration given to its, certainly into its maintenance, but also into its continuance, expansion. And this last one is a little bit different. It deals with the social economic impacts, in particular, the ecological goods and services, not only direct impact on commercial species, but other ecological services that are provided by sensitive species to ocean acidification. Then the last theme here is on monitoring. We're certainly encouraging the investment of New York State into the coastal monitoring program, not only governmental investment, but investment by business and industry. We are recommending a periodic or regular status and trends reporting of monitoring programs in a way to inventory data has been collected and make it accessible to partners in dealing with this effort. And the recommendation to establish a New York State Sentinel site, one site where long-term and diverse research can go on into the elements of ocean acidification that we hope to pursue. Have the next slide, please. There are some of these things going on now. The DEC has funded an ocean ecosystem monitoring in New York Bight. This is an example of some of the results from one of the cruises back in '88, looking at bottom pH and bottom aragonite saturation. I think Megan had some of these locations for these sites on her slide. Involved with this is also our own glider operation in waters south of Long Island. In addition, there's the nitrogen action plan that I mentioned earlier, in dealing with coastal waters in the embayments around Long Island in particular. We, of course, recognize, the next slide, please, of course, recognize the need for coordination, not only with the nitrogen action plan, but also particularly with the EPA national estuary programs. There's the Hudson River in New York waters, the South Shore estuaries in Great South Bay, the New York, New Jersey Harbor estuaries, the Peconic estuaries, and Long Island Sound. And even as we speak, there's another meeting going on right now with the OA community between New York and Connecticut and looking at cooperation from there. So we're looking for these partnerships to go on. Like I said, the final public report should be out sometime at the end of this year, and it should be in its final version then. I'll stop there, and I think we're holding questions to the end. Is that right?
That's right. And thanks so much, Henry, and really probably holding questions for group discussion to some extent, but very much appreciate you joining today and giving that presentation from New York, and looking forward to the final product, and appreciate everyone's leadership through the last couple of years on that task force. All right. Okay, Rachel, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Rachel Lamb. I work with Maryland Department of the Environment's Climate Change Program, and I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the foundations of our current Ocean Action Plan, and then in the spirit of this conversation, really focus on where we see implementation occurring, and how a regional monitoring effort could support that. So first of all, our OA Action Plan, you can go to the next slide, was formed in 2020, and it was a result of a 2015 task force report, which really worked to provide a baseline assessment of current science, and a lot of the recommendations that came out of that task force report are captured in this plan. So this 2020 plan focuses on 3 priority action areas. You can see here an improving understanding of the science, expanding public awareness and increased partnership, and then foundationally reducing the core causes and increasing resilience around OA. Together, these 3 priority areas are really helping us as a state maintain the ecological integrity of our coastal and inshore environments. It helps us protect, of course, our prized seafood and other economic assets, and also helps us protect and lift up our cultural heritage, which is really anchored on making sure we have healthy waters, including in the Chesapeake Bay. So if we dig into each of these 3 priority areas in a bit more detail, and the next slide here, you'll see that Maryland is really on the front lines of trying to reduce the 2 primary drivers of OA here in our waters. So foundationally, we know that climate change impacts are increasing in terms of pace, magnitude, and extent. Here as a state, we've really tried to craft ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. And here, earlier this year, we established a plan to achieve at least a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 from our baseline year of 2006. So we want to make sure that that is economy-wide, and also considers increasing focus on the role of natural and working lands, including our coastal ecosystems. Our second primary driver, and is particularly acute here in the Chesapeake Bay region, is of course nutrient runoff and the resulting challenges with eutrophication and other impacts to our aquatic resources. So Maryland, of course, has participated in the Chesapeake Watershed Agreement, and in turn has developed a series of plans, including our most recent Watershed Implementation Plan, or our WIP, to really try to help support a resilient Chesapeake Bay by 2025. This really is a collaborative effort across state agencies, and also with our other state and regional partners as well. A second key component on the next slide here of state leadership is honing public awareness about OA, how it connects to those 2 primary drivers I talked about a moment ago, and how we as a state can really reinforce and strengthen partnerships to continue moving the needle on increasing resilience around OA. So one of our primary mechanisms of doing that here in the state is engaging an independent climate commission, which is called the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, which is really charged with helping keep an eye on how we're doing relative to our stated climate mitigation goals, and helping to support additional mitigation policy, or thinking about the science and technical resources that we might need to better galvanize that action. So we've been engaging with them directly and institutionalizing OA action within the framework that they're responsible for in terms of their work plan and core recommendations. Of course, we also want to continue leveraging our ongoing work within the Chesapeake Bay program, thinking about it from that range of opportunities for supporting living aquatic resources, as well as overall water quality and coastal bay resilience. And we really just want to be sure that we're enhancing and streamlining existing partnerships. So we're really proud to continue as an executive member of the OA Alliance, and also supporting and participating in MACAN. And again, our federal partnerships as well, such as with NOAA, are really important to thinking about this work. And we want to do so in a way that really streamlines communication and action across communities of practice, like with oceans, water, climate, and those that are really focused on the industries on biological resources. Finally, we really want to help expand, again, public awareness. And in doing that, we want to focus on public connections to underscore impact. So we want to continue to frame out OA action as climate action, or framing OA action as helping us achieve a healthy Chesapeake Bay. And we really are trying to figure out the best mechanisms for getting the word out, including through some of the work by the Commission, but also championing some of this with all of you in a regional network sense. And then finally, one of the key components of this action plan, which is on the next slide, please, is improving scientific understanding, again, to help us advance mitigation and build resilience. So there's kind of 3 topical areas here that we've identified as priorities and are hopefully going to be included within the Climate Commission's work plan for the following year. One is a focus on aquaculture, really thinking about different adaptation options and a lot of the potential gaps or unknowns, particularly in a dynamic bay environment. We haven't necessarily seen dramatic or strongly negative impacts right now, but what would it continue to look like in the future? And where could we potentially intervene and help the industry? A second is increased relationships or connection between OA action and SAV or seagrass restoration. There's a lot of great science that's been done to begin to clarify their role as potentially buffering OA. And so we want to keep supporting that, exploring that, and really thinking about spatially strategic SAV restoration, where we can achieve maximum benefits, not only for aquaculture, but perhaps also for supporting mitigation, like with blue carbon. And finally, we really want to support ongoing, consistent monitoring of key indicators. One of our plans for doing this is to support state monitoring enhancement plan that takes a lot of the existing sites and data and network that we have and leverages it towards this purpose. So that is in process now. I know Dr. Jeremy Testa is who's participating in this call today, might talk a little bit more about it later. But we really want to, again, think about how we can leverage that to, in a longer term sense, to not only do some of this co-benefit monitoring, but also help us really maintain momentum on implementation of this plan. All right, and then finally, on the last slide, just wanted to highlight several thoughts we have, or just some general principles that we might have when thinking about forming regional monitoring. One, we really want to make sure that this approach to regional monitoring provides consistent communication of drivers and impacts across communities of practice. We have, of course, our climate folks, our ocean folks, those who are working directly with our living biological resources. We want to make sure that this approach makes sense for all of them, and that we are helping to streamline communication to really help the public understand those connections and how this data can help us better understand those connections. Second, we want to support strategic investment in infrastructure and science that really helps sustain data collection and access. We often get really good snapshots in time of certain data indicators in certain places, again, in certain years. But if we can really invest now in that key infrastructural support, that kind of coordination and access to data can be maintained. So we can really better understand trends and changes over time. Third, we really want to make sure that any data collection and analysis can really get efficiently integrated into existing information pipelines. For us here as a state, that means really helping to make sure that the data and the implications of that information for policy and management are made clear within the context of our Independent Commission on Climate Change, and also that it gets translated into how, for example, the Chesapeake Bay program might be thinking about its goals and its work plan. And then fourth, we'd really like to be a part of supporting innovative research that really takes a landscape scale view and really pays attention to a lot of these co-benefits that have been raised already so far. We want to be a part of that, supporting all the good work that we've tried to support here in Maryland, but also thinking about it again from a regional approach. We already are engaged with a lot of our neighboring states in terms of climate action and nutrient reduction, and we want to continue to do that as well in the context of OA action. So with that, I'll conclude. On the next slide is contact information for both myself and my colleague, Jim George, so you can feel free to contact us directly if you have any additional questions.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Rachel, and thanks for Maryland's leadership across all of these different platforms and planes that you mentioned. Well, I think that was a great set of presentations from our 3 states engaged today. Thank you so much, and really set a great context for us to be diving into for the rest of the day. So with that, I'll turn it over to Avalon, who will give a quick intro for our next table setting, if you will, diving a little bit more into what's going on in the Mid-Atlantic around monitoring and mapping tools. So Avalon, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jesse. So yeah, that was a really wonderful overview from the states on the line about how they are looking at OA action planning and what kind of information would be useful to each of them. So want to now kind of transition to do a deeper dive into OA acidification monitoring and kind of taking a look at what monitoring actually is. And then once we take a look at what monitoring actually is, where does that data that's collected go, and how does it become useful products for decision making? Because as Dwight mentioned in his opening remarks, monitoring is sort of a means to an end, right? So want to really kind of explore that further through the remainder of this workshop. So first off, to kind of give us a sense of the different ways of collecting data, the utility of each, we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Jeremy Testa. He is Associate Professor at the Chesapeake Biological Laboratory at University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. He is also on the MACAN Steering Committee and is our new lead for the MACAN Science Working Group. So Jeremy, I will turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Avalon, and thanks for having me here. I'm an academic who, primarily has a position involved in research, but I, have been involved with the Maryland OA Action Plan, and I've spent a lot of time, working with and thinking about monitoring data collected in Chesapeake Bay and other estuaries. So, I have a background that kind of has provided a number of experiences thinking about monitoring data, what we do with monitoring data. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say in this presentation has been said already, either today or in other reports, but perhaps the fact that I'm going to say things that are comparable reveals that there's some convergence in the thinking within the community. And while I hope that this is helpful, it's not comprehensive, but hopefully it provides some fodder to discussion as we think about monitoring. So next slide. Just to try to express some of my thoughts in short, just right up front, in case I don't communicate them before. I've been thinking about how there's this really long history of monitoring in the Mid-Atlantic geared towards water quality, but there's been a lot of OA, either direct OA related variables or variables that can support an understanding of what's driving OA or estuarine acidification. And that these water quality monitoring programs really sort of underscore the effect that water quality does remain a top priority in many states. And this whole idea of really trying to amp up our OA monitoring in the Mid-Atlantic is in many ways proactive, simply because some of the effects perhaps have not been so acute to this date. I'll talk about a lot of the monitoring that's out there, and really what that reveals is that there's a significant potential to leverage existing infrastructure to build off of. So nothing has to be done from the ground up here per se. And that includes data, the infrastructure to sample, the databases and the infrastructure to handle data, and people to collect that data and to analyze it. There's relevant measurements and monitoring that are made by all kinds of entities that provide a potential for collaboration. So this includes, the data coming out of research, but there's NGOs, there's community science or citizen science, whatever you choose to call it, and just a wide range of efforts among all the federal agencies and also the states. So there's, I'll just leave that last bullet there to look at. Next slide, please. So I just want to sort of walk through some examples of the types of monitoring that are happening. This won't be comprehensive. It largely ignores the shelf, even though there's a lot of work going out there. See Dwight's note in the chat. But I just wanted to emphasize that in this region, we have this broad shelf that interacts with, estuaries and lagoons, both large and small. So there's a variety of systems with different drivers of the carbonate system, and there's a variety of different monitoring programs that have been in place that might be built off of. So next slide. And I know this has been said already, and many of you know this, so I'll be brief, but if we think about the coastal zone, and this has a little bit of an estuarine bias, there's a lot of different things we have to think about in terms of what we want to capture with monitoring, and then what complications we might run into in terms of interpreting data. So, we have all these monitoring programs, but they haven't really, the historic water quality monitoring programs, I should say, they don't necessarily emphasize OA, right? So they would collect pH, but almost because pH was relatively straightforward to measure within the infrastructure they have. But as you've seen in some of the state presentations, to really try to capture these dynamics, you need to measure at least one more part of that system where you have pH, carbon dioxide, dissolved inorganic carbon, and total alkalinity. And so a lot of the thinking, at least that we've done in the state, is built on around the idea of, we have this large data set of pH primarily, some alkalinity measurements. The pH data have some issues, both in space and in time. And so how can you use that existing information sort of to establish a baseline? Is it good enough for climate type data, or do you have to use it in a different way? Eutrophication, it's a really strong signal. There's spatial differences in that. This is a populated region. Estuaries have lots of habitats. We've already heard about wetlands as a key player. Seagrasses can have an effect. There's oyster reefs that, if they're dense enough and take up enough of the estuary, their metabolism might have an effect on this. And that what the sort of previous MACAN monitoring paper, one of the things it emphasized were these salinity gradients. So you have a lot of different sensitivity to acidification because of freshwater input with relatively poorly buffered water. That creates gradients, that creates diversity of organisms. And more importantly, that water, that river water in and of itself probably has a long-term signal in it that's changing for maybe a number of other reasons. So just monitoring that river input can be a big part of an OA monitoring program, thinking outside of the box of the coast. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to do a little bit of a survey of some of the past monitoring programs and just use them as an opportunity to talk about some of these sort of particulars of monitoring. So there's a lot of places, and I use Chesapeake Bay and Delaware Bay as an example here, where there's really substantial sort of 3 to 4 decade monitoring data that have collected a lot of other stressors like oxygen, for example, chlorophyll, but they also have measured pH. Maybe they've measured alkalinity in a few places, but these are really focused on a whole different water quality target associated with nutrients, and they tend to be kind of focused towards the deeper open waters of these two estuaries. And so I think, one of the things to think about with these types of places is where you only have pH, what do you build into your sort of new monitoring if that's what you're aiming to do to get more out of this? And perhaps just adding alkalinity is the most useful thing to do. And that's one of the things we're trying to think about in Maryland, because we've talked about cost. And so where you're trying to get the largest bang from your buck and you want to add one more variable, where you have long pH records, alkalinity might be the best thing you can do. But we've seen where you can measure DIC and TA in new programs like we just saw in New York. You know, that obviously brings two variables that have really good analytical precision to the table. Next slide.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just giving you a halfway point, Mark.
Yep, I'll get there.
No, you're
So
great.
here's an example from New Jersey. We've sort of heard about what New Jersey's doing. You know, they have an effort that's happening off the coast, but here you have a system of buoys in the lagoons and some other water quality stations. And so, you know, there's this, you know, there's just another example of, you know, how these programs here are really kind of similar to what the other states are doing. Next slide. The one point I want to make here is that in the Chesapeake Bay region with Maryland and Virginia, they realized that these deep water stations they had maybe didn't characterize all the habitats they needed to monitor for oxygen and chlorophyll criteria. And so they decided they needed to launch this shallow water monitoring program, which instead of, you know, taking kind of discrete samples, they deployed sensors that were getting really high frequency information. And this same sort of thinking, I think, applies to the acidification problem, getting up into these shallow waters where aquaculture is happening, where there might be, where the hatcheries are. So, you know, building off these shallow water monitoring programs and getting high frequency are some of the ideas that have been put out there before for us to consider as we think about monitoring. Next slide. This is an example of the NAIR sites that many of you are familiar with. And so there's a handful of these places, but they have actually really long-term records of these same sort of water quality SON type data and have very long pH records. They probably only have pH, but there are places where, you know, because you have an infrastructure to do high frequency sampling, there's some effort to add carbon dioxide sensors in some of these places. So then you have two parameters. You have them measuring at the same time frame at the same place. And so it's a way to get a bit more information, maybe establish a baseline. Next slide. And so the last one just sort of builds off that too, just to highlight that, you know, EPA has a program to put PCO2 sensors alongside pH sensors in a number of their estuaries. They're part of the NEP. And this is just an example of places on the East Coast and in the Mid-Atlantic in particular where that's happened. Next slide. Okay, so there's a long history of monitoring in the Mid-Atlantic, and how does this help OA? So bullet one, I've said this before, there's this wealth of monitoring data, and I put this quote that Whitman Miller said, you know, given this huge amount of monitoring stations, there's, you know, some strategic measurements might bring the community up to speed pretty quickly. So I'm contrasting here just having pH versus adding pH and total alkalinity, which then allows you to compute the other parts of the system. And one of those important things might be the, you know, calcium carbonate saturation state. And that's a parameter that we tend to think is more related to organisms. So it feeds into what I'll talk about in a minute about biological monitoring. Next. So for some waters, there's kind of limited data to establish a baseline. And it's sort of like, well, where do we need a baseline? What are the most important sites? So this existing data actually might be helpful for helping prioritize the sites that are, you know, have features that might be the most interesting or the most relevant for getting a baseline and establishing a program for OA. Next. This is something I was talking to Carrie Pohl about, that, you know, many stakeholders, you know, still in this region care about water quality, maybe more than they care about OA, at least in this moment. And so packaging these two stressors together, I think Dwight alluded to this as well, is an important part of, you know, of how we understand the system and really how we're going to interpret some of these carbonate system changes related to OA. Next slide. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave that there. Okay, next. Okay, so I don't really have answers to this, but I just wanted to at least raise it to the group and hopefully it's helpful. So what are the goals for, you know, OA monitoring? So, you know, a lot of us that do modeling, you know, we're hungry for data to validate our models, and we're hungry for data to help establish a baseline. And it's really important to the states and everyone as well, because, you know, oftentimes we don't have necessarily a great baseline right now, or we're just working now to establish a baseline, and we need that to understand, you know, what's going to happen in the next 20 years, in the next 30 years. You know, there's a biological response here. It sort of gets to Dwight's comment about let's understand why we want to monitor before we monitor. And, you know, in the past, I think there's been this big emphasis on, well, or I think it was said earlier, like let's just collect the data and then figure out what to do with it. And I think part of that process is trying to understand how we're really going to connect it to living resources. And maybe that means that we have to co-locate monitoring with those organisms. Maybe the hatcheries are a great place to monitor because having information right where you have a lot of information about the organisms and how they're doing physiologically is right packaged together so you can understand that, which is different than monitoring the chemistry and then trying to apply it to some laboratory-based stressor experiments and trying to use that to constrain habitat. And, you know, just to, without going through all of it, you know, I think there's, you know, if you think, if you're a state and maybe eutrophication or nutrient loading is one of your sort of toolboxes to control acidification, there's also this global problem, and what can the states actually do actionably? So they may be able to sort of have a control on it through nutrient load reductions, but maybe one key strategy is just figuring out where resilience needs to happen and prioritizing that. So maybe there's some assets like specific biological communities. So maybe the monitoring needs to go to those places, those assets, and have those be the focus for where monitoring might happen. Okay, next slide. Let's skip these two. I already gave you the heads up on that. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that some regional efforts already exist. You know, Chesapeake Bay program, I work with that a lot, but it's a good example of where you have multiple states sort of coordinating together in order to get to run a monitoring program that has specific targets. They collect the same variables. Their monitoring programs are relatively coordinated. And they work with federal partners, like the USGS provides the nutrient loading that really drives the analysis in that program. And I see Dwight's comment in the chat where, you know, having the freshwater end member to understand what the riverine effect is really important. And one part of thinking regionally is using, you know, the asset of the USGS sampling, for example, to do that. There's also sort of cost sharing. There's a data portal. So I think you can click through the next two. So just those two involved. So let's go to my final thoughts. You can just click through them. So, you know, states are going to have their own priorities, but hopefully measurements can be comparable. And there may be some aggregate collective regional knowledge that's useful to each state, even though they might have different priorities they've established. You know, enhanced monitoring or monitoring in general is well beyond adding just chemical measurements. You have to engage the right people. So whatever is monitored is going to be helpful to the stakeholders. There's cost involved, like everyone has discussed. And, you know, a process for translating the data to answers, this has been said already a couple times today, is really important. And, you know, we can't forget people and we can't forget the process in this. You know, all of these data, as Dwight said, I think are not helpful unless there's a clear pipeline to get them to a place where they can be used for, you know, planning, action, resilience, whatever it may be. Just the goals of monitoring need to be well established ahead of time. And I think that process is well along the way. So I'll leave it at that. Hopefully this seeded some discussion, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. That was really an excellent overview, and I learned a ton. I hope you all did as well. So as we kind of start thinking about how to kind of take the data that's collected and what to do with that data, what kinds of products might be useful for folks, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of lay a foundation of information and knowledge about how regional data hubs such as the Maracus Oceans Map and the MARCO Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal are currently being used to display information about ocean acidification, and maybe start getting people's gears turning about how these could be leveraged in the future for some spatial or other data products associated with OA monitoring. So With that in mind, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Mary Ford at Maracus, who will talk a little bit about the Maracus Oceans Map. And then right after her will be Carl Villacova, who is the portal project manager for the Marco Mid-Atlantic Data Portal. He may also be joined by Nick Napoli, who's the senior advisor for Marco and Marco's portal manager. So with that, Mary, over to you.
Thanks, Avalon. Hey, everybody. I am going to introduce myself. I'm Mary Ford, co-coordinator of MACAN and also director of engagement and external relations for Maracus. I am going to turn my video off because I'm going to do a really quick live demo of Oceans Map, and internet gets a little weird sometimes. So good to see everybody. Let me share my screen. Nope. Sorry, this is not. There you go. Can you guys see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, great. So apologies for that. I'm going to give you a very, very brief look at the Maracus Oceans Map. But if at any time in the future you're interested in a more detailed or personalized tutorial, please contact me and we can definitely set that up with our data management team and other Maracus teammates. The Maracus Oceans Map, for those of you who don't know, is a dynamic and complex data visualization tool. It incorporates near real-time and historic observational data as well as predictions and models. It also gives users the opportunity to customize data views and compare data as needed. The layers are divided into sections. So you can see over here, each section has a dropdown with relevant data layers within that section. So it's just an easier way to find what you're looking for. You can also up here where it says filter data layers, search for something like wind. It's very windy outside of my office right now. So, and that will sort things for you. So going back just to the main screen, there's also some themes. We have a couple of themes that have been identified based on users. I won't go into any of those today, but they again make another option for you not to have to sift through all the different layers on the main page. A couple other fun features include there's a time slider. So you might not really be interested in information from today, but maybe you want it 30 days, 12 months, who knows? We also have a customizable data range. You can pick any dates in there that you want. And if there's data available, those data will be in there. There's also a legend. So you look at this map, oh, look at all the pretty colors. What do those actually mean? If you click on legends, it'll show you exactly what all the different things mean. When you log in, this is just the main login screen. If you go to oceansmap.maracus.org, there are a couple of default layers that are pre-selected. You can go through and let's say we don't want to look at glider data anymore. You can just go through and deselect or select anything you're interested in. You can also turn everything off to start with just sort of an empty base layer and explore different things that way. I'm going to jump in to an example on our Chesapeake Bay portal. I'm actually showing you the back end right now. So one or two of these data sets are not on the portal live yet, but they will be very, very soon. But I wanted to show this example. So don't be shocked if you go later and they're not on there exactly. So this portal is very similar to the regular Oceans Map. It just has layers specific to the Chesapeake Bay. Although the layers on here are available on the main Oceans Map, it's just a smaller subset and a more narrowed down look. Just like the main Oceans Map, these are the default layers turned on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn them off for this demo. I'm going to first go ahead and pull up the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Forecast System, bottom dissolved oxygen on the map. Sometimes it takes a second to load, especially in this back end version. It will load. There you go. It's usually much quicker than that. I think there's, because of the storm, it's taking a little bit longer. So if you're looking at this information and you're not exactly sure what that means, you can hover over the actual layer, and there's a couple different options. You can look at the info button, and this will show you some background, some context, as well as relevant links in here. You can also, if you're most interested in data up here, you can just click on the map any place, and you'll create what we call a virtual buoy or a virtual station. When you create that, you can see a time series plot shown below. It'll show you what information is available for what layers you have highlighted in the time frame that you have selected. You can go through then and change this date selection to look at whatever information you want. Many different layers allow you to customize the color scale and other visualizations. So for example, if we go to the Chesapeake wave height layer, you can then hover over the settings icon and change color scale range, color palettes. A lot of the different layers have different options for this. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that this is all very customizable based on what you're looking for.
And Mary, this is Jessie. Can I just ask a question from the chat, which probably has implications?
Oh, sorry, I can't see it.
No, of course, no, that's my job. Which of course probably has implications for later on today. But is it accurate that the oceans map doesn't currently yet have regional carbonate chemistry data integrated into it, but really it's the Chesapeake Bay OA forecast that's in there currently? Is that an accurate assumption or statement?
Yes, I believe that's accurate to date. I think that is something that the data management team is working on, but I will have to circle back with that team.
No, that's great. Definitely a next step from one of these, group discussions to think about that potential.
So yeah, just a couple of quick highlights. I know I'm like already over time and I barely got to show anything, but a couple quick highlights. I did want to show Margie's I did show Margie's CBEF stuff, but I also want to highlight we did include a couple layers from a project sponsored by NOAA's Ocean Acidification Program. They consist of water quality data from 1984 to 2018. And this is where the time slider function down here is really helpful, because obviously if you look at today's date, you're not going to come up with any information. I do encourage you to go in and explore the tool. We're constantly adding new layers, as Grace mentioned in the chat, and getting recommendations for new layers. So if there's something you want to see or interested in, please just let us know. A really quick overview, apologies for that. And I'm happy to meet offline or connect with you with the Maracus team to go through this in much more detail, because there are so many other cool features that I didn't get to highlight. So
thanks so much, Mary. So neat. I encourage everybody. I think somebody put a link to the oceans map in the chat, so definitely feel free to go in and play around. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carl and Nick to talk about the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Data Portal. Thanks.
Thanks, Evelyn. And I'm going to start real quick while Carl's getting set up, and just some quick context. I'm Nick Napoli, and with Carl Villicova, we manage the Marco Data Portal. And where the Maracus Oceans map is really focused, as you saw, on ocean conditions and predictions, we're more focused on maps and data products that characterize the footprint of ecological resources and human activities. And that's because the portal was created over a decade ago to really inform ocean planning, things like offshore wind, telecom cable siting, habitat conservation, electrical transmission, aquaculture siting, waterways management, designating anchorages. Those are all uses of the portal. And they are more around understanding where activities and resources are and have been. And ocean acidification is kind of new for us. And I think what we intend to do is a quick overview of the portal, much like Mary just did. We're really curious as to what data are useful for this community. So we're here to learn as much as to demonstrate. Carl.
Sure. And for those who don't know, the portal can be found at portal.midatlanticocean.org. So anybody who wants to jump on and follow along or experiment with it later, please do that. And, you know, as Mary said, we also don't have time to give the full-on portal tour, but if anybody's interested in that, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to arrange that for you and your work groups or your agencies and organizations. So right here you see the Marine Planner, which is the portal's mapping application. And on the left, a list of about a dozen different themes or data categories. At the very bottom, you'll find water quality. And first on that list is acidification monitoring locations. The very first one on the list, all acidification monitoring sites, was the first OA map that we did going back to around the spring, maybe early summer of 2017. We now have 7 maps in total, but this one started, and for those who can't read the legend, and I'll zoom in a little bit, the orange dots represent sites where there is continuous monitoring. The blue ones are sites where cruise data was collected. The reds are for where there were glider collections taken. Green is where there's ongoing fixed stations, and purples are for where there were former fixed stations. And for any of these sites, you can click on a dot for a pop-up that has some information that could be of interest. So for example, clicking this orange one right here will tell you if what the name of, in this case, the buoy is, who's managing it, whether it is measuring pH, yes, where if it's measuring dissolved inorganic carbon, no, total alkalinity, no, partial carbon dioxide, no, and then other parameters where which it is measuring, all listed there, and a little bit more information about when and links to more information about it. In some cases, these links can take you to sites which actually have the measurements themselves. These dots don't and are not meant to convey anything about you know, the actual conditions. It's just where monitoring is taking place. So maybe about a year after we created this one, the group got back to us and asked if we could basically chop up some of this information into a few maps that helped break it out into other ways that were useful. So for example, currently sampled sites only. So in this map, we have all of that stuff that I showed from the previous one, except we get rid of those blues and the purples where there's not actual sampling taking place right now. Down here, we see the partial carbon dioxide monitoring, places where it is now or at some point was monitored. TA sites, DIC sites, pH sites, and then finally, sites by number of parameters. So turning on the legend, the reds are areas where all 4 of those, again, are or at some point were measured. The light blues for 3, the browns represent where 2 and the black triangles are for 1. And just like that other example I showed, you can click on any of these sites for more information about how it was being collected, who was collecting it, when, and so forth. So right there, I'm going to stop. I know we're pushing for time, and look forward to any questions that come up.
Thanks so much, Carl and Nick. This is great. Great to see this, and we're definitely really looking forward to kind of taking another look at, how we can, what other kinds of products would be useful to see on these regional data hub tools. So thank you so much to Mary as well. So with that, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Carrie St. Laurent. She is a member of the MACAN steering committee, also of the MACAN science working group. She's been a real thought leader in helping us inform this agenda and the content in this agenda. And I'm very happy to have her on board to kind of talk about what we sort of envision to be a first step in moving toward getting this a regional monitoring inventory together. So Carrie, with that, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Avalon, and for the whole team. This has been fantastic. I've also learned a lot. I'm going to be quick because I know everyone probably wants a break. And so this is the rallying cry for everyone to participate into a assets inventory survey that we are planning to deploy.
Hey.
I moderated a session that was focused on optimizing.
I can hear you. Yes, I'm not sure who that was.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I just want to make sure. It might be that my...
Oh, okay.
It might be that I'm unstable.
Please turn on mute.
It might be that I'm unstable, Carrie, but I want to go ahead and start from the beginning because I feel like I blocked out on some of the important details of we're inviting you to do this inventory survey, which will go ahead.
Sure thing. I wanted to make sure I keep putting myself on mute. So, well, I will just restart with the context. Is during the 2019 MACAN workshop, I got the opportunity to facilitate a breakout session focused on optimizing existing monitoring. So as you can tell, this is a topic that's been near and dear to me. Discussion was the need to expand current monitoring and to better understand and develop cost-effective monitoring. So those are all identified to better advance those needs is to develop an ocean acidification be a resource for others, for example, to help inform the type of sensors and measuring. Jeremy Tester showed it best for comparability. So it's a great regional effort. And so the breakout session that I'm facilitating during the breakout groups will be discussing this in more detail. So if this question resonates strongly with you, please participate, because we're going to be looking to understand the what, where, and how that survey is developed, distributed, and ultimately used. But we hope that everyone will participate in the survey when we do send that off, because the more people who participate, the better the utility of it. So I will end there, but thank you.
Great, thank you. And so yes, look for some follow-up about that inventory that Carrie just described. So with that, I'll turn it to Jessie to kind of lead us through our first health break, or our health break.
I will lead you through the health break. No, thanks so much, Avalon, and all the presenters during section 2. That was great. And hopefully we have a lot in our brains about sort of how these pieces fit together on different time scales with different actors. So what we will come back to when we finish with our health break is a little bit of a discussion. We're kind of going to move over in this sort of like case study from the West Coast, which is going to pick up on Carrie's sort of call to engagement in this inventory and really show an example of how the West Coast states got together and put together such an inventory and what the process was for that, what it's meaning to inform. And then we'll go into our larger group discussion, picking out some of the pieces that we hear from those discussions or things that you're already holding in your minds. So I think we had 10 minutes. Let's go ahead and say 5 minutes for this health break, which feels good to me. So I'll go ahead and turn off my camera, turn off mute. I don't have any fancy slide or anything to show you, but I'll call you back verbally in about 4 minutes or so, but just give people's brains a chance to relax and unwind. So thanks so much. See you soon. Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for the opportunity to take a few minutes of quiet and just to sort of let things absorb. I've definitely seen that as a tactic in many workshops in the virtual world, and hope that we carry those forward into real in-person workshops as we go into the future. It's nice to just take a break for our brains for a little bit. So I will go ahead and pull us back. If you can hear me, we're going to go ahead and get started again. And to do that, let's see here. I am really happy to turn it over now to sort of transitioning into section or second part of the workshop today. And so we're going to hear a little bit, as mentioned, this case study from the West Coast, particularly around the inventory that Carrie teed up, thinking about what MACAN is, or Carrie will be leading in partnership with MACAN around that particular piece of work. So first, we're going to hear from Dr. Karin Braby with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife around the efforts that took place over the last several years to put together the inventory on the West Coast, lessons learned, probably a lot of unanswered questions still that we're all grappling with who've been involved in that effort. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Justine Kimball, who is with the California Ocean Protection Council, or the OAH Task Force, California Ocean Protection Council, who worked with an OAH task force to then take some of the components of that inventory at the state level and do a gaps analysis that is guiding now the state on future investments, current, actually very targeted, impressive investments in actualizing some of the gaps identified in that gaps analysis. So turning it over to you, Dr. Braby, and for the group's information, Karin will also be our leader in the group discussion. So we'll all get very familiar and appreciate Karin's time with us today. Over to you.
Great, thank you. And please do try and keep me on time, because I feel like I have so much to say and so many responses to this first session, or first two sessions. It's really exciting to hear about your thinking on how to really build a monitoring inventory, monitoring network, monitoring enterprise from what you already have, which sounds like you have just tremendous assets already in hand. So hopefully, excuse me, my thoughts this morning, it's still morning in Oregon, where I'm participating from, this afternoon will underscore some of the themes you've already shared. There's a lot of similarity and resonance in thinking that I think will be really interesting to share with you, and hopefully for you to hear. Next slide. So personal story, I'm integrating back into the office. That's where I am right now. Was doing some spring cleaning in the fall to try and get myself back into the office atmosphere. Found this cartoon. It's been sitting, dusty on a shelf for too long. The take home from Dilbert was that ocean temperature monitoring would be a good idea. And next, Holly, the conclusion is, wouldn't it just be cheaper to measure nothing and estimate the whole thing? And next, of course, the answer is yes. It would be really easy for us to just sit in our offices and say, yep, the ocean's warming, and yep, the ocean's acidifying. But local measurements are really what connect us as managers, as scientists, as decision makers, to our environment. And we have to have those measurements in a place that's meaningful to us, and for biological measurements of a species that's meaningful to us. And our decision makers need that in order to motivate and make the hard decisions they need to, in order to address that cost benefit issue that Dwight mentioned in his introductory remarks, and all of the action planners have pointed to in their comments as well. Without these measurements, in addition, our understanding of change would be static, which is an oxymoron, but is really to the point. We need those measurements to make sure that our assumptions about change are accurate, and that they're changing at the rates and in the directions that we think they are. Okay, so with that aside, next, I wanted to connect you to my places and my species first as a way of connecting my audience, you, to what we've done on the West Coast. And this is the place that I start. This graph just speaks volumes to me about connecting our atmospheric cycles and accumulation of carbon dioxide to what's actually happening in the ocean. And this is from a Sentinel site in the Hawaiian Islands. And I have used this with legislators, with scientists, with fishermen, with all kinds of folks, and try and show them there's empirical data. We are suffering from this now, and that message is still unfortunately needed in order to start conversations about how to adapt and mitigate. Next. So on ocean hypoxia, and that data set is one of the best, even though it's quite distant from Oregon. For ocean hypoxia, we have a much richer data set that's much closer to home, and Cape Perpetua is one of those sites. It's iconic to Oregonians. It's iconic for tourists who are coming to Oregon to visit our coast. And it also happens to be a site where we have one of our longest term data sets. And this is both for oceanographic monitoring and biological monitoring over time. So this is an inspiring site on a personal level and on a scientist level. Next. And here I'm showing you a graph that was produced by Dr. Francis Chan from monitoring data this year, but it's a data set that gives you average and standard deviation over many years in gray and black. And then the red line is the data just from this year. And it shows what has now been called the hypoxia season in Oregon, which is after the upwelling transition. We get this depletion of oxygen, which progressively gets worse during the season until we get that disturbance in the fall from change in oceanographic conditions. This year just happened to be a really bad year, early spring transition, really bad hypoxia this year. And this kind of information, again, connects people to the place, a place that they love, showing them that this is happening now every year. Next. I'm going to rush through this slide, but I love the conversations that I've heard already today during the workshop about the species that are important. It is about species. Even though I'm a biologist and I'm biased in that direction, people respond to animals, people respond to biology. And oysters, of course, are central both to the West Coast and East Coast story. In Oregon, we also have a lot of problems and anticipated problems with Dungeness crab and pink shrimp, both shown here, which are central to our commercial industries, but also things like salmon and halibut, which are also iconic species. And we've tied harmful algal blooms to changing ocean conditions, whale entanglements to changing ocean conditions. So kind of higher order issues that we're dealing with that we can really get people to connect to on a personal basis as they're contemplating what their role might be in helping respond to change. Next. So like we've heard this morning, this afternoon, wherever we are, all of the West Coast states now have action plans. So just kudos and congratulations. It's a heavy lift to get these plans put together and have the discussions needed to put priorities in order. Monitoring is central in all of ours, as it is in the ones that we heard about today. Next. And all of the action plans on the West Coast stem from recommendations that go back even farther than the couple of years ago when the recent action plans were finalized, to the West Coast Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Science Panel, which concluded in 2016. And they produced many products, had great insight on a number of levels. This piece here is specific to their recommendations on the importance of a monitoring network and attributes. And number one on their list is supporting the needs of decision makers. And while this means something very specific to me, I think you could read a lot of interpretations into that very simple statement, and that needs definition and exploration in any decision to do something as time consuming as developing an inventory or developing data products. Who is your decision maker? What are they going to do with the information you provide? How do you nudge them towards a future vision that you want? Next. So now I'm going to get a little weedy, and I put in too much information with the idea that these slides might be available for reflection after today. Rather than going in blow by blow, I'm going to provide some highlights and keep going. That's a lovely ringtone. Thanks, Hallie. So first of all, from our science panel, the network that we build and maintain is expensive. And so in adding to it, maintaining it, it needs to be strategic. And the inventory, of course, is the first step in understanding what you have. And then that leads you to filling gaps selectively and intentionally. Next. Our task force was comprised of scientists and policy leaders from Alaska to BC to the West Coast states. And having both policy and science leadership was essential to keep both the science at a rigorous level as well as the policy at a targeted outcome for the inventory in terms of informing decision makers. And one of the things that we could not have done without, even with all of these policy and science leaders, was a suite of Sea Grant fellows. And I'm being very specific in calling out the Sea Grant program, both at a Canals level and state Sea Grant level, because we had 3 different fellows who were working on this inventory, and the capacity and intellect that they brought to this endeavor was literally indispensable. And it was months of time. It was a huge effort. In addition to leadership from the Interagency Working Group on OA through the NOAA OAP, Oregon, California leadership, Alaska, BC, and Washington contributed a lot of work to this inventory as well. Point being, it's hard to do an inventory. It takes a lot of effort. And so designing it up front the way you want to deliver outcomes that you want is really essential. And I would say that we get maybe a B or maybe a B plus if I'm being generous with our inventory. It gave us a lot of great outcomes I'll describe briefly, but we could have done better. And so I encourage you to do better in building your inventory. One of the things that we struggled with was how to house the inventory. And in the years that it's been since we started this process in 2016, we have made such progress in understanding how to build data portals, how to provide data, and the Marco and Maricus portals I just saw for the first time today are remarkable and provide a huge advance over what we had when we started this in 2016. Also, we were struggling with the fact that we were dealing with international boundaries, different governance structures, and one California current ecosystem, which runs from Alaska to California. And yet this mishmash of governance structures involved and interested in that system. And so housing this information, bringing the capacity to the table to develop the inventory was a struggle for us in that regard. And that may not be the case for the East Coast, but I encourage you to not let it be an issue, thinking about those jurisdictional boundaries. Next. Here's where I'm going to get fast. So inventory design, I've already heard Carrie and others talk about these themes. You know, who is doing the monitoring? Where is it happening? When is it happening? Physical parameters, chemical, biological, really focusing in on long-term sites, either that are at risk or that used to be there and are now defunct, but could be brought back online, and we can take advantage of that historical data set that's there, and really having an eye to augmenting existing sites with additional metrics so that hi, Grace. I see your chat. that will take advantage of the capacity and the historical data that are there. All right, so next, please. This is a stepwise process that we took. It basically involved developing a template, deciding what metrics we were going to inventory, coming up with criteria on which data sets fit that, and which fell outside of the scope of the inventory. Lots of quality control, lots of interviews between our team and data providers, checking back and forth, making sure information was accurate. And then the building of the GIS-based portal and mapping products all the way down the line, working among these 5 jurisdictions. Next. So inclusion criteria here, again, I'm not going to go into this because this is going to be jurisdiction based. This is just for reference for you all after the fact, but we certainly had definitions for physical and chemical metrics next, as well as biological data sets that fit our needs. And for biological and oceanographic sites, we really had an eye to where are the valuable sites, where are the valuable places in terms of capacity and long-term data sets that we can add value to potentially by further investment to build a network. Next. So this was the result of the inventory, just some stats, just kind of interesting facts. Thousands of assets that were tracked in this and thousands more that weren't brought into the inventory due to not meeting criteria. So it was a very big, big effort on the West Coast. And from what I've seen, it'll be a bigger effort on the East Coast. Next. So outcomes, we did finish the inventory. We completed it after 2 very intense years of the task force and Sea Grant fellows working on it, plus another year of follow-up. It currently lives in many places, including on the NANUS portal. NANUS is our ocean observing node for the Pacific Northwest, even though this data set includes data from California, British Columbia, and Alaska as well, which are not within scope for NANUS. And that speaks to that problem of governance structures not really matching kind of the oceanographic area of interest in terms of a regional inventory and monitoring enterprise. Next. So we learned a lot, and one of which was our template. And this is, in my opinion, this is not an official opinion of the inventory task force, but my opinion is that our template was too detailed. We got into the weeds on exactly how things were being monitored, down to the sensor level, down to the different types of metrics of the same parameter, essentially. And it was both time consuming for the data providers to provide us with that information, and it required a lot of gymnastics in terms of rolling those metrics up into information products that spoke to the network aspects of the inventory. So those were challenges that you may already have some ideas on how to solve or have already solved on the East Coast, but I think thinking about the level of detail that you want to communicate is essential, because regardless of what kind of gaps analysis you do, you're going to have to dig into those data sets that are in the inventory much more intentionally once you've decided where you're going to go, where you're going to take it. And so think about whether you need it in the inventory or whether you just need the discovery at a high level of those projects in the inventory. So I've already kind of spoken to the inventory being difficult from developing, but then the same reasons make it a difficult enterprise to maintain and keep up to date. And in fact, the inventory was completed and has not been updated yet. So it is a static product and it's still useful. And I'll speak to that in a minute, but we haven't kept it a living document, a living information product. Another area that I think is really important for this group to struggle with is, what does a regional gap mean? It wasn't as easy for us to identify as we had first envisioned. We felt at the outset that maybe if we inventoried monitoring enterprise, at the end, it would be self-evident what those regional gaps were. It wasn't. One thing that became really clear is that monitoring happens where there's capacity, and the capacity distribution does not necessarily match the oceanography. I'm speaking to something different than governance structure. Here I'm talking about, where are the people who do the monitoring? And for example, Cape Mendocino in California, Cape Blanco in Oregon are super interesting oceanographically. They're both biogeographic barriers, but there aren't people there to do the monitoring. There are very few people there to do the monitoring. And so establishing an intense long-term monitoring site at those locations poses different types of challenges than it might based in Newport, where I currently live, where we have hundreds of oceanographers on site all the time through our enterprise of Oregon State University, NOAA, USGS, EPA, and US Fish and Wildlife Service, all co-located in one place. Next. So has it been used? Absolutely. I have used it personally. Oregon has used it. We have learned through the process of inventorying, just learning through doing, who is involved in these enterprises, who's interested in being involved in future solutions, which is also a key outcome, but isn't documented in the inventory per se. It has helped us demonstrate need in grant proposals and get those proposals funded. And it's built collaborations that didn't exist prior to the inventory process. I would say that a gaps analysis, as you'll learn from Justine next, was necessary to conduct separately from this particular inventory, but the inventory was an intellectual stepping stone for the process that you'll hear about. And also separate is information products. So this inventory didn't lead to really useful information products, but it led intellectually to thinking about how we talk about our network. Next. So take homes from me, this is if I could have done it differently, here are some things I might have done. One, and this is actually, we did this right, be inclusive in geographic scope. Include everything that you think is oceanographically relevant, but have leads in each jurisdiction, because as already has been noted, states have different priorities, they have different mandates, and you need a foundation in each jurisdiction to kind of be the agent of change and contributor to this process. Second is be really strategic with metrics. Don't measure everything under the sun or inventory everything under the sun. Think about what's likely to inspire action from your decision makers once you decide who those decision makers are. You seem to have on the East Coast portals and data catalog homes that may serve in this function, but I encourage you to get that sorted out prior to starting the inventory. The network is really in the eyes of the beholder. We don't have a network on the West Coast, but we know who is collaborating, who is providing data, and in knowing who those folks are, we have a network. So talk about it that way and promote it as a network. It is a network, even if those folks don't consider themselves to be a member of a formal network. So with that, I really would like to focus on audience with you all in the first breakout discussion session that we'll have. It's actually not a breakout, it's a plenary discussion session. So I'll just highlight that and turn it over to Jessie to introduce Justine. So thank you.
As always, thank you so much, Karin, for that great overview. I think it's a great way to queue up what our plenary discussion will be, and really appreciate your time. And so with that, I'm going to, we're just going to dive a little bit deeper, as Karin suggested, on this next step of the gaps analysis. And I want to beg upfront Dr. Justine Kimball's forgiveness. She has to run in about 9 minutes. So she's going to give us the lightning round, which secretly probably works in our agenda better for time, making up time. So thank you, Justine, for being here. We really appreciate it, and happy to get the highlights from you about how California, as Karin said, took this one step further, and sort of what that has meant to sort of the priority setting and policy and funding henceforth. So over to you, Justine, and thank you. And we won't be upset if you just sign off. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and sorry, scheduling was just not our friend today. Kat is hopefully going to be joining for the afternoon session, but we just had a bunch of conflicting things. So as Jesse said, I'm going to be quickly introducing how California sort of took that inventory, that compilation of all these different data sets and efforts, and went through a gaps analysis process and effort that has led to some investments recently. Next slide. So just really quickly, for those of you who don't know, the Ocean Protection Council is within the Natural Resources Agency within the state government, and our executive director serves as the Deputy Secretary for Ocean and Coastal Policy as well. Next slide. We have quite a long history of being involved in West Coast ocean acidification efforts. We released our action plan in 2018. Our strategic plan calls out ocean acidification specifically with some objectives around actually to develop a monitoring program that is very coordinated and is has output that is relevant for decision makers and managers. And then relevant to the next step of this discussion, for the gaps analysis in 2020, we worked with our ocean acidification and hypoxia science task force, which we've been working with for many years. Sorry, there's not a slide on them, but we've been working with 8 really wonderful individuals, in research and from the NGO community and NOAA to advise us on ocean acidification and hypoxia related science and priorities. And then, so this was the timelines. Next slide. So this is the report that they produced. So we basically came to them in 2020 or 2019, I can't remember which, and we're like, we have this there's this great West Coast inventory that compiles all this information, but everyone keeps asking us, like, essentially, the analysis piece, like, so what? So what does all this data really mean? Are we measuring the right things in the right places to make decisions? What are those decisions that we want to make? Are these, investments happening? And for future investments, where should those go? What does a truly, this network piece that Karin was mentioning, what does that look like for California? And we did discuss, ideas of doing a West Coast wide gaps analysis, but unfortunately, because we were, a taxpayer funded agency, our mission is really focused on California, so we had that sort of California focus. But I think broadly the recommendations could be applied West Coast wide. We had sort of first approached the task force, as can you really look at all the data that's been collected and tell us, like, where, again, like that question of, are we collecting the right data in the right places? And they were like, yeah, that's a really hard question. I think you're going to need to find, like, a consultant or contract firm to do that for you. What we can do is essentially take, like, a broad, look at all the data you're collecting and, like, where are the information gaps? Like, on the back end that you would want to see from all that monitoring data, and what can we say like broadly about recommendations. And so their recommendations from that gaps analysis report are here. Their first one was to better connect chemical and biological monitoring. They had two specific recommendations around that to leverage, again, going to the capacity issue that Karen mentioned. It's very expensive to go out and to take these measurements and to have the resources, the lab facilities, the people to take the measurements regularly. So one of their big recommendations was to really leverage the programs and the scientific community that was already doing this work to take things to the next level. So either to leverage ongoing cruises that collect the chemical data and to add standardized biological data to that, or to try to leverage onto biological collecting efforts and to add chemistry to that. And then to continuously improve OAH models as decision support tools. OPC has invested pretty heavily in some West Coast-wide modeling to look at impacts of nearshore inputs to the biogeochemical system and how that impacts OAH in the near shore. But through this modeling process, the calibration, the validation, data sets to calibrate these models are very important. And then again, to strengthen that continuity and to support those ongoing programs and data sets that are currently being collected. Let's see, next slide. So that was really a great gaps analysis report, and we were really interested in specifically the first recommendation around biological collecting co-located coupled biological and chemical data. And so actually there was a next step that we had a science panel, and that was for really great individuals as well. Easier to rattle off 4 names than 8, so I'll just say it was Francis Chance and Sue Spinagle from OSU, Jen Newton from UW, and Jim Berry from MBARI. And they really tackled this question of standardizing biological indicators across ongoing oceanographic cruises. You can see the effort, those are the monitoring programs that were targeted, and those are the sampling grids for that. So again, to Karen's point of really having to leverage where they're already collecting measurements. And so they looked at these programs like the frequency, the current data collection efforts, and where those could be enhanced with biological indicators. And so where we landed is standardizing pteropod and crab shell dissolution sampling across all of the programs for 2 to 3 years of monitoring. And so OPC funded was actually $1.7 million, funded this suite of programs to add these biological measurements to these programs to standardize the best practices and protocols. So part of the project is to end up with the best practices and protocols. And then the data side as well, we've funded SENCUs to coordinate on standardizing the data delivery and discovery side of things as well. So the overall goal of the suite of programs is to continue to collect biologically relevant indicators across these suite of long-term programs. And next slide. And then in addition to those suite of programs, which or that suite of funding, which we brought to the June council meeting, we also have a solicitation that is out right now. We're reviewing full proposals right now. Next slide. And this is where we are focused on the broader suite of recommendations that the task force gaps analysis had recommended. So additional monitoring projects that will enhance the connection between chemical and biological monitoring and address the spatial and temporal disparities, improve models. So we have this solicitation focused on those recommendations. And then we can just sort of breeze through these actually. Next slide, next slide, next slide. Yeah, so we have research projects and synthesis as well. Yeah, and there we are, back to here. So we have this suite of focus areas for the solicitation, and we are currently reviewing those projects right now. So this is California's, this is a process that we went through to take that inventory to that next level, to that next step, to say, okay, well, where do we need to place additional investments? And the big lesson learned is, like, we really couldn't have done this without this outside group, both the OAH task force, those 8 folks, and the panel of experts that really teed up like what we should be investing in based on that inventory. So I'm going to have to hop now. I think Kat is joining us. So she might be able to, yay, Kat's here. Okay, great. So we're sort of musical chairs here. But so hopefully Kat can take over in any discussion as needed or in the breakout rooms to discuss this process in more detail. And then I highly encourage people to look online at this, the Monitoring the Gaps report, as well as that panel report is really, really excellent. So with that, thank you. I'll pass it over to Jesse, you, and Kat.
Thanks, Justine. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it big time, and we'll be sure to include a lot of these details and documents and websites and follow-up materials, et cetera, so everyone can dive in more detail as desired. So from here, I think what I'd like to do, we have, I'd say, a good 30 minutes, although I might be, we'll see what we can get done. I'd say we'll hone it, we'll aim for 30 minutes. We might do a little shorter. And the idea here was just to give, it's hard in a plenary with this many people, but we wanted to just do a little bit of a call and response based upon some of the discussion already queued up today. And so Karen Bravey is going to lead us through some of these questions. And your agenda that you got has all of these questions listed, so we're not going to get through every single one, but I think we're just going to trust Karen's instincts and trust your instincts to have an organic discussion, keeping in mind that the goal of this discussion is really to inform MACAN's thought process around activities in 2022, but also informing discussions around what this inventory for a monitoring network at a regional scale would look like here. So I'll invite you, Karen, to join me on screen. I will also note that in the chat box, you will see a link for something called Jamboard. It has all the questions that we're going to kind of pick around already written down. So as you just want to type your answers rather than try to follow a larger communication, that's a-okay. And so we want you to use that resource as we're moving through this, and we bear graciousness. We're asking graciousness from you to try to facilitate a larger discussion like this. So Karen, turn it over to you. And I'll also ask if folks want to turn on their cameras during this period of discussion, that is welcome, and we appreciate it. So Karen, no small task, but turning it over to you.
No small task, but super exciting, because I think all of the talks in this workshop have been funneling towards this central question of, why are you all interested in putting an inventory together? And there are lots of obvious answers to that, because we need it, because we need to know what the trends are, but why? What is it that is going to take advantage of this extra effort to document ocean change and turn it into action in the future that will benefit you in the work that you do? And one of the things that I want to pause on before I let you go, because I think probably many of you want to jump in and just say, this is my answer to that, is that the beauty of this workshop and this collection of people is that you're working regionally and you have individual mandates, but you also have individual resources to put on the table and share. And I encourage you to think about that and think about what you as an individual state or a state representative can put on the table to share, because I don't think that there is a need or an expectation for everyone to do everything within your state in order to contribute to a network. Instead, how can you collaborate to create that? And in first, doing that, you need to have agreement on who your audience is, so it's useful across the region. So who has a vision of what that regional audience is? Who is it, that you want to change the heart and mind of in order to achieve a vision? And what's the vision? Where are you going with it? And this is where I just pause and leave uncomfortable silence until somebody is inspired to join in.
And I'd say feel encouraged to use a hand raise function, or also feel encouraged just to unmute yourself and chime in. That's fine too.
And maybe things are going, oh, I see a couple of things on the Jamboard. It's in print that is way too small for me to read, so somebody else is gonna have to read it.
Julie, I'll call on you first. And also, just before you go, Julie, I'll just note Jamboard is a supplement. We don't need to interact only on Jamboard right now. It's just really an opportunity to get your thoughts. It will be open for the rest of the meeting, for the rest of the day. So don't feel over anxious about Jamboard currently. But Julie, go ahead. We'd love to hear your
Hi, yes, I'm with the Chesapeake Bay office with NOAA, and one thing that we've been having a lot of discussions around Chesapeake Bay is that we're interested in sort of this change that's occurring related to habitat suitability. So we've been supporting research and trying to understand what those species thresholds are around different fisheries, around oysters. And so really when it comes to monitoring for ocean acidification, we would like to see it sort of connected to those impacts, those ecological impacts, especially to fisheries. And so we've been sort of thinking about like fisheries management programs, who manage fisheries, who are gonna have to manage these fisheries around these changes that are going to occur from coastal acidification. We also working with and trying to understand oyster aquaculture, how that's gonna get affected. And so those are sort of the things that pop up in my head that we've been talking about in our office and with our partners, and different research we've been supporting to try to sort of formulate and answer these questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and fisheries and aquaculture management obviously are really important outcomes. That's a huge economic endeavor, a lot of investment locally and economically, and so you want to protect that over time. And maybe one question back to the group on that is, what would you expect a fisheries manager to do in order to manage that fishery? Would it be time area closures? Would it be changes in harvest allowances? Because those might be driven by different types of data that might be collected. Time area closure might be a hotspot monitoring effort. Whereas a harvest cap might be driven by completely different data, that's stock assessment data, that doesn't relate to an OAH monitoring network. So other thoughts? I can hear everybody's gears going. So one of the things that that occurred to me in listening, I had several take-home messages, and I was sitting here at my desk like, oh, that's another great idea. I got to write that one down. And one of them was thinking about species vulnerabilities and strategic research. And all three of the state action plan presentations touched on this to some degree. Having a list of species, I mentioned that in my thoughts, that connection to individual species is a really great way to connect people. But question to the group, is the species list from New York different from New Jersey? And is that different from Maryland? And is that different across, or is there a uniform list of species that almost represents the region you're trying to look at, where you could collaborate on finding out more strategically species vulnerabilities to talk about those. And my guess is it's a regional cluster of species. And I would point to the West Coast that Alaska, the Alaska Acidification Network put together an infographic on species vulnerabilities quite a while ago now, maybe even as long as a decade ago. And California and now Oregon have developed infographics based on the concept that the Alaska Acidification Network started. But the information we're drawing from is common to all of those 3 states. And it's really the state context in developing the talking points around it that's different, but the information is the same. So just encourage people to look at those resources in thinking about species vulnerability and strategic gaps. Henry, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, we're talking about species list in New York and New Jersey, and well, for us, it's Connecticut also. The species lists are pretty broad, so there is a lot of overlap. But the problem that we really are dealing with is that the individual coastal waters, whether it's the bay or the river or the sound, have species that are more of concern than others. So there's this subdivision that really focuses down on 1 or 2 species that are different for different water bodies.
And when you say they're of concern, is that because there is information saying they're more vulnerable, or because of economic reliance on those species?
No, most of it is economic. These are the commercially valuable species.
And that's definitely a way to get at what I think of typically of decision makers, which is, talking about the economic reliance and risk associated with inaction for that economic endeavor.
Right, but one of the things it does is diffuse the concern. We may be interested in oysters, but only in oysters in one place, or scallops in the Peconics, but not clams in Great South Bay. It's a two-edged sword to have that sort of focus.
Other thoughts about species vulnerability assessment and maybe regional ways that you might approach that, because that's an information product that might be really useful. But only if you have a really clear audience. Who are you trying to motivate? Is it the oyster grower? Is it county commissioner?
Curious if I could hear some of the earlier state presenters. Henry, appreciate that, but also Rachel and or Meg, be curious your answer to that question of audience. I mean, to some extent, you're the audience, right? But we are trying to think about what your audience is. We think you're the audience, but who is your audience, and sort of what does that mean to you, that word?
Yeah, I was trying to find that raise your hand feature. I couldn't find it. Yeah, I was kind of trying to think. I was thinking the same thing. That as far as the species, there's probably like many species where there's overlap. Like you could come up with a giant list across the Mid-Atlantic where there are species that are important to everyone. But I think there are always, I mean, probably particularly along the coastline, but I think every state's going to have those iconic species that speak to them. So where like you can come up with that big list, like New Jersey is going to have that handful of things that, whether maybe it's just perception, or maybe it's, pockets here and there where, this is perceived as really important in this estuary, or this is a huge economic hit for this particular aquaculture niche, like this is, going to have a huge economic impact here or there, or just, you could just think of history of, imagine going to this area and not seeing whatever this species anymore. You know, there's just the history and you said that I think everybody has their iconic species that are going to be different from area to area. So I think it's both. I think you know, there's something to be said for the little pockets and for getting what you can from the larger lists.
I'm kind of interested in Henry's comment about the dangers of relying on economic value of species and, you know, kind of constraining you into a particular conversation. And that might be something to really think about. If the East Coast Regional Inventory vision is to capture biology in some way, some kind of biological response, you're going to have to pick a species or 2 or 10 and focus on those. And then that data is going to have to speak to somebody who is going to do something for the region. And so that conversation, even though it may be difficult to have, is going to be necessary to have it, you know, affect change in a broad way. There's always the option of having it affect change just in a single jurisdiction. But are there ways to build that across a broader region and share resources and share kind of aligned goals that might help with limited resources? We all have limited resources. I know you all are struggling with the same limited resources I am. So how do you leverage that? How do you take advantage of that?
Well, that's the dilemma, of course. As soon as you pick one species, some people stand up and cheer, and the rest of them say, I've got other things to do. And if you pick a species, the lowest common denominator, nobody gets excited about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're facing here. You know, like I said, in one embayment, you would go after scallops, everyone is behind your back, but no one in the Hudson River cares. So I don't think there's an answer, but it is a problem.
Yeah.
If I could add something as well. Henry said in his presentation, he mentioned Jamaica Bay, and he mentioned rib mussels. And there really are no oysters in Jamaica Bay. There's been recently an attempt to restore oysters to Jamaica Bay. It failed. And rib mussels are as abundant as any population on the East Coast. That is the greatest suspension feeder in abundance. So I think we do have to pay attention to non-commercial species for that reason alone. And I think there are other examples one could cite.
Kat, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I apologize if I'm being redundant from what Justine and I's presentation was earlier, since I logged in a little bit late, but you know, another alternative that we've kind of taken in California is approaching this from maybe not as what is the most charismatic or commercially important species that regionally is highly valued, but what are the more sensitive species that can be kind of, you know, the canary in the coal mine for worsening conditions, and is relatively easy to sample and is over a wide geographic range. So that's why we focused on pteropods and crab larvae. And of course, there's huge implications up the food web to species that are ecologically and economically important. So it offers another route that can increase the geographic scope often of a lot of these efforts. And so, you know, while Dungeness crab larvae are obviously of high importance, that's not as relevant to Southern California because Southern California doesn't have Dungeness, but we're looking for the analog, like whether it's red rock crab or some other some other larvae that does have that similar importance. So I just wanted to throw that in there into the mix because it is another route.
Yeah, that's great comment. Rachel, your hand's up.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking Jessie was kind of hearkening me back to the kind of state perspective on this. When I think of who I'm talking to, I mean, part of it is, you're right, talking to state agencies and helping us be more strategic about where we're allocating our resources, or being thoughtful about how we leverage existing resources in terms of like the monitoring sites and the infrastructure we already have. So part of it is talking about agencies, but a lot of our, as I mentioned before, our pipelines and where a lot of our resources go when we're thinking about investment in the whole health of the Bay, for example, which is a part of Maryland's ethos, is through climate and climate action. So through our climate commission and how we channel resources to support mitigation and resilience in climate context, because we have strong mandates to do that. And then our nutrient reduction strategies through our participation in the Chesapeake Bay program and how we think about land use management towards that end. So what I would want to do is use those existing pipelines, which have strong direct connection to this OA context, and maybe think about how you could build OA elements, whether that's additional indicators, whether that's targeting spatially explicit co-locations where you're getting more information on OA, but really making them relevant to SAV, because we care about that for climate, we care about that for the Bay, we care about that for the health of our biological resources. So it's like bringing OA into those existing structures, because we can levy those resources towards OA action. And I obviously our biological resources are a strong part of that motivation for why we care about, the Bay and the economy of the Bay. So I think that's going to come naturally into the conversation. And of course, we have our list of, 5 or 6 key species that are mentioned in our OA plan and that we're trying to monitor and protect. So maybe that's one frame is we get those in the conversation, but maybe we start with existing pipelines for nutrients and climate, because I think that they're going to be able to get more monies for OA than just OA outright. At least that's my thinking.
So I'm gonna spit back what I think I heard, at least some themes that I heard, which is that OA, the chemical and physical monitoring is common need across the region, but maybe local biological connections might be different. And I think that's a really interesting theme to pick up on and carry forward and think about that. Maybe it's regional collaboration just on the chemical and physical aspects, and then more local jurisdictions rely on stakeholder interest and ecosystem function and species to really identify what biological parameters to add to that OA monitoring at that site. And there are a couple of comments coming in on the chat. I'm just looking at the time, and I think one of the values of this workshop is really going to be in breakout sessions. And so I don't want to spill over too long into that. Jesse, what do you want to do in terms of time management and the comments in the chat?
Yeah, no, I think that, thank you for everyone. Thank you. I'll just underscore some of the comments in the chat a little bit around this notion of not expressly focusing on key species, but also on ecosystem services and relationships to, in the chat, specifically water quality, which is tied into, Karin, what you were just describing. So I think we'll do about 5 more minutes. I want to ask you, I think, a question, Karin, that has come in the chat around the inventory. And then we can maybe then go off into our breakout groups, and just while we have you sort of in this group, sort of get your kind of not concluding, but thoughts around it. And it comes from, I think it's okay to say because it's public, comes from Beth Turner in the Northeast Atlantic, and talking about, is it more effective to start at a regional level with something like the inventory and then fit states into this overall context, or do we want to start with the individual states and compile that into this regional whole? And I think it's sort of this question that I've heard you all on the West Coast talk about. Is it like, California plus Oregon plus Washington equals region, or is it something a little bit different? And what is sort of your approach in the inventory and thinking about the way you collect data or information or just monitoring projects that are applicable to one versus the other, or are they one and the same?
Yeah, it's a great question, Beth. Thanks for the question. And my 2 cents on it are that the relationships aspect of building an inventory is essential. And those relationships are stronger the smaller scale you go in geography. So my relationships within Oregon are stronger than my relationships with folks in California or Washington or Alaska or BC. And there is a bit of arm twisting and wheedling to participate, as Carrie was just doing some cheerleading, trying to get folks pumped up about the inventory on the East Coast. It is not everybody's favorite thing to fill out an inventory survey. Folks' data is elsewhere already. There are requirements through science grants and regional agreements, university agreements to contribute your data and make it accessible. So it's already accessible. This is different. This is an extra step that folks have to take in order to make their data discoverable. And it's not always their first priority. So those relationships, I think, are important, and having a linchpin person in each jurisdiction to help do the arm twisting and the sharing of thanks when the task is done is helpful, and was very helpful on the West Coast.
Avalon, you want to go ahead?
Just a sort of culminating thought that I didn't want to lose before we kind of move into breakout sessions. And it's something that Karen had actually mentioned in her presentation when talking about sort of lessons learned from the inventory that was done out West, and really want to be thinking about what the level of detail is that we want to pursue here in the Mid-Atlantic. I think that was one of the questions that we didn't get to for this facilitated discussion, but I'm sensing sort of a theme rising to the top here, this way to sort of leverage existing infrastructure. It's something that Jeremy talked about in his presentation as well, and wondering if that is part of this survey to some degree is just taking a look at what that existing infrastructure is and the potential for it to be leveraged in sort of this regional monitoring setting. So I will kind of put in a plug for Carrie St. Laurent's breakout session. She's going to be talking a lot more about this idea of a regional monitoring inventory in the Mid-Atlantic. And so if this is something that is of interest to you, please do take advantage of that time. So thank you.
Great. Beth, do you want to say anything? I saw maybe you were gasping for air. I couldn't tell. Okay, so I think what we will do, so thank you, Karen, so much for being here and for sharing and for sticking around as our friend throughout the rest of the workshop, and for all the presenters. A ton to get through, a lot of great content. Obviously, this agenda is not going to produce answers and next steps immediately. It is a thought experiment as much as it is, the real kind of roll up the sleeves concrete work. And so really appreciate your engagement. So for the next hour, or our last hour, I think what we're going to do is we're going to break out into breakout rooms. And what I will do is I'm queuing them up right now. What you'll be able to see on your screen is 4 different options. And then it will tell you which it is, and you can self-select into the room you want to go to. And then we're going to give you about 25 minutes in there. Every room has a facilitator. They have their marching orders. They have their creativity that they're bringing to the discussion. We're going to pull you back, and then you get to go to a second breakout room. So it'll be 20 minutes or so a piece, 25 minutes a piece. Avalon, anything you want to add about jam boards or any directions that you have for folks as MACAN co-coordinator as I queue up these little rooms here?
Just wanted to mention that one person from our MACAN core team will be in each individual breakout room. So we'll be capturing notes. Like we said in the beginning, I don't believe that the breakout sessions are being recorded. I think that's correct. So we will be taking notes and then synthesizing kind of key takeaways from these discussions. Also wanted to note that there will be kind of 2 opportunities so if you see 2 rooms that you really want to join, you'll have an opportunity to join the second one about 25 minutes in. So we do maybe Jesse already said this, but just to reiterate, once you choose a room, please stay in that room. And then because we don't want to be super distracting by having people pop in and out of rooms. So click on the link, stay in that room, and then we'll be summoned back to reconvene. And then we can choose our next room to go to 25 minutes later.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So I think check your agenda if you have confusing ideas, the rooms track, but I think the title is getting cut off. So number one, I'll just say is, talking a little bit more about action planning, information needs, and synthesis products. Room 2 is going to be digging into the regional vulnerability assessments led by NOAA OAP and talking about the goal and applicability for those assessments in states. Room 3 is going to be a deep dive on biological monitoring. So if you got really excited about co-location of chemical and biological monitoring, Emily is your gal in room 3. And then as Avalon said, room 4 will be hosted by Carrie talking about the deep dive of the inventory. So if all goes as planned and Zoom is good to me, we're going to open the rooms and you'll be able to self-select. If you're having issues, let me know in the chat and we'll get you where you need to go. All right, thanks guys. Talk to you soon.